Amen. Well, good morning, everybody. How are you guys? Okay, that was a little lackluster, but be some grace. All right, so I just because I'm a dork, there's no spiritual connection here. But Dana Forte, who takes pictures here for us at the church, of our events, it's on Josh's Instagram if you want to see it. But your pastors also double as thugs because this is what it looks like. Like we're the West Coast Mafia here. This was during Easter, and I was talking to somebody with my hands a lot, and Josh looks like he's standing off to the side. He's like, "Yeah, do what she says, or I'm gonna come at you." Anyways, so he's great when you have complimentary photos like this taken of yourself, but it's life. So, well, good morning. Last week, Pastor Josh started a new series on. We went through a couple iterations of the name. It was like, okay. New wine and old wineskins, or like, no, new grapes. No, that sucks. So what we landed on is taking territory, okay? And it's this idea that Josh and I have been walking in this season of our life, particularly the last 9 months, with our daughter. And just this idea of what does it mean to bring and carry the presence of God with us that invades darkness, that invades the dark places. And I'm not just talking about strip joints and stuff like that. I'm talking about when we go through seasons of our life where we feel like God has abandoned us, where we feel so scared and shriveled up on the inside that we feel like there's no hope, there's no space. And out of this season that we've gone through with our daughter, for just a recap real quick for some of you guys, our daughter last year at the end of August took her to school, picked her up, brought her back to my office. She was going to change into her Taekwondo clothes because that's what she does. And she just started to say she had some kind of neurological or muscular skeletal event where her muscles started cramping, and she got tingling everywhere, and then she lost the use of her arms and her legs. And so we took her to urgent care. Urgent care is like, no, you need to go to the ER. So we go to the ER, and it just started this long process of trying to figure out what was the matter with our daughter. The short of it is we still don't have an answer. We don't have a solid diagnosis. But in this season, we have walked through a lot of dark days. When you're used to seeing your kid bouncing off. Sophia has, in fact, when we went to the ER, and Josh isn't allowed to give any information at all anymore, but, they do the intake, right? The nurse, you go into the triage, and they're like, why are you here? What's going on? And so Josh was like, we're trying to say our daughter is very active, and she's not active right now. Something's very wrong. She can't use her arms and her legs. Like, she went from being a Taekwondo and black belt to she just couldn't move. And so Josh is talking to the nurse. He's like, yeah, she used to be so active. She's broken so many bones. And instantly the conversation turned. The nurse was like, Mom and Dad, you shut up. I'm talking to your daughter. She's like, tell me about the broken bones. I was like, oh, Josh, you can't lead with that. Anyways, so that was 9 months ago. And this idea of taking territory is not, let me tell you what it's not. It's not this idea that often gets promoted about how God's a cosmic genie and he just wants to give stuff to us. He does want to give stuff to us. He does want to bless us. But it's not for our gain. It's because we are God's hands and feet on the earth. We are called to bring and to bear God's presence with us and to invade earth with heaven, okay? So a lot of times when we say taking territory or similar language, it conjures up ideas of, prosperity gospel, and that's not what I'm preaching here. I just want to make that very clear. And in fact, the name it and claim it, it's a mindset that we have where, for me with Sophia, I spent months asking God why. Why is she like this? God, help me to figure out, this is how my brain works too, like I'm a pit bull. like the way, like I want to figure out the problem so I can solve it. And there's been no figuring this out. I mean, we've been to specialists. She's had so many tests done. And I just was asking. I was like beating my head against the wall. God, why? Why? And I felt like God was like, don't ask. It was shifted, and it was gentle. God wasn't a jerk. It wasn't like, loser, you're asking the wrong question. He was like, no. You don't ask the why. Because, Mako, on this side of heaven, you may not get an answer. But you need to trust me. Do you trust me? Do you love me? And I said, yes. He's like, guess what? I love your daughter more than you do. And let me tell you, I'm not proud of this, but I'm just going to get this out. When Sophia was little, we went to this, indoor playground, and the moms are supposed to be watching their kids. And this group of moms wasn't watching their kids, so I thought, if you're not going to parent your kids, I'm going to. And so I noticed Sophia was crying, and I'm like, what's the matter? And she goes, there's this little boy that keeps blocking me, and he's pushing me down when I go to the slide to go down it. So you know what I did? I walked up to that kid who was 4 at the time. That's right. I chewed out a 4-year-old, and I said, are you pushing my daughter? And he's like, I said, you touch her again, you're in trouble. Are we clear? And he goes, yes. And so I went in the corner, and a few minutes later, his mom came and just like, what's the matter, Jimmy? And anyways, I will do anything for my daughter. And it has been excruciating not to be able to help her, not to be able to come up with a solution for why she's in a wheelchair. But out of this season, it feels like God has birthed something new in the hearts of Josh and I. And it's this idea of taking territory. And this idea of taking territory is all about having a kingdom mindset. And that sounds so cliche, right? Like, oh yeah, yay, kingdom mindset, Jesus, yay, rah, rah, rah. But it's not. It's seeing our lives from the vantage point of heaven. And that shifts everything. So instead of me asking Sophia, why is Sophia going through this, God? Why? Instead, asking God, what do you want me to do? What do you want us to do right now with this? How do you want us to proceed? We trust you. We love you. Let's go. Asking the how propels us. That's part of the kingdom mindset. And let me tell you, some of my darkest days, I would drop Sophia off. And maybe you're like, Mako, I'm struggling to hold down 2 jobs and pay rent or the mortgage. I got kids that are going off the rails. I got marital issues. My marriage is gasping for air. It's on its last breath. I've got a diagnosis that I wasn't expecting. Whatever, life is tough. And maybe you're like, I can't fit another thing on my plate. I'm barely keeping things juggling. And you know what? That's where I have been often. You guys know I'm very transparent. I'm a hot mess most of the time. But in this season, I feel like God's like, Mako, I will give you grace for the journey. And with your daughter, I was one day, I just hit a wall. I was like, I am done. I want to quit ministry. I'm done. God, I'm done. We pray for everybody. We do this. We've been faithful. My daughter's in a wheelchair, and it's killing me right now. And I felt like God was like, I know, I get it, because it's hurting me too. But he's like, follow the breadcrumbs. Keep following the breadcrumbs that I lay down. I was like, I don't want to. Okay, fine. And in moments, a lot of times I'd drop Sophia off at school, put her in her wheelchair, and she'd go down to her classroom. And I get back into my car, and I would just barely make it to my car, and I'd just sob. And then I'd go to the gym, and I'd sit in the car, and I'd just sob too. And you know what, though? At a certain point, I felt like when he was like, follow the breadcrumbs, stop asking the why, ask the how. And so I'd sit in my car, ugly crying with snot, used up all the Starbucks napkins that I had, and I just sit and I would sing worship songs. They didn't sound pretty, but I'd sit there and I would praise God, and I'd say, Jesus, in this darkness, I am taking back this. I'm taking this back for you. I'm letting heaven invade earth here, God. This is your territory. And Josh and I would do that. We'd listen to praise music at home, or after sometimes, are there kids in here? All right, so sometimes, I'll just use my favorite word right now. Kids are just tools, right? You don't have to, you can look at 2-year-olds and how they play and figure out that we have a sin nature that, okay? And this one particular day, Sophie had come home from school, and there's these kids, these boys that were making fun of her, but she couldn't run. They're playing dodgeball, and school's been great. Like, they've adapted for her. But they're like, Sophia, why don't you get out and go after the ball? And she was like, and this wasn't in the beginning. Like, this was just like 3 weeks ago. Of course, Mommy wanted to go down and beat these kids up. But I didn't. And I just was like, I was just, once again, I'd hit a wall, and I was like, ah. I felt like I was like, fight for her, fight for kingdom, and praise me. So our neighbors, Liz and Lala, raise your hand. They're our neighbors, and they go to church here. I've been cranking Lauren Daigle. What I want to play is Rage Against the Machine, just full confession. But I was like, I am going to play Lauren Daigle and Christian music, and I'm going to praise my heart out. So I'd be doing the dishes, angry, praising. But you know what? In this season, God has just shown me. He's like, I got you. And it doesn't feel like you're taking territory, but you are. And so what I want us to look at real quick is this story of Jericho, Jericho 6. Joshua, add another book to the Bible. Joshua 6, verses 1 through 16, and then chapter 20, or verse 20. And this is, I think, epitomizes, this story's got so many good principles of what it means to take territory. Okay? All right. Now Jericho, this is Joshua 6, starting at verse 1. Now Jericho was strongly fortified because of the Israelites, no one leaving or entering. Now this is interesting because Jericho was a fortified town, and they had enough supplies in it to last for years. Okay, verse 2. This is interesting. I want you to underline this. Verse 2. The Lord said to Joshua, "Look, I have handed Jericho, its king, and its fighting men over you." Now what's interesting is verse 2 obviously comes right after verse 1. But what I want us to get here is looking at, these are the facts, right? Verse 1, Jericho was strongly fortified. This place was a citadel. And what I love is that in verse 2 is God's reality. And God's like, guess what? Ain't no thing. Because guess what I'm going to do for you guys? And look at this. Look at the verbiage. It says, look. So pay attention. Does it say, I will hand it to you? It says what? What is it? I have handed Jericho, its king, and its fighting men over to you. It was like God putting a bow on it. And I just think this is so important to get in our life when we are walking through whatever season we are. Maybe there's a lot of you guys that are like, I'm on a good season, and that is great. Praise Jesus. We need to let heaven invade earth and those good seasons too. But what I love about this is God is like, I know Israelites. Okay, and I'm just going to paraphrase because we're short on time. But basically, God's like, I want you to march around the city of Jericho, Israelites, for 6 days. Okay, and we're going to fast forward here to verse 10. And God gives this, condition to the Israelites about marching. Verse 10. But Joshua had commanded the people, do not shout or let your voice be heard. Don't let one word come out of your mouth until the time I say shout. Then you are to shout. And what I love about that is that, can you imagine the Israelites? Okay, so little context. This is the first city that they are to conquer in the Promised Land. So they've crossed the Jordan, and God's like, okay, you guys are in the land, but you got to conquer it. And your first stop's going to be Jericho, this fortified city. And so God's instruction to them is to walk around the city for 6 days, one time every day, silently. And I was reading that, I'm like, God, you are so weird sometimes. What is up? And then as I started digging into it, I was like, oh man. And let me tell you this too. So God had put a gag order on the Israelites. But guess what? There was no gag order on the Canaanites living in Jericho. And the Canaanites living in Jericho were mean, nasty heathens. And I imagine, can we show that picture of the... Okay, so this is what Jericho was. It was this fortified on the bottom, had a base, and the Israelites were to walk around. And then can we show the cross-section? All right, so this is what, can you see the guy in the very bottom right-hand picture? The screen there? Okay, so that's where the Israelites were. And so there were two walls. There was a lower wall and an upper wall. Combined, in the way that it was built, it was 4 stories high. So the Israelites, I want you to get this visual in your mind. The Israelites are on the bottom, and they're circling, and they have to be silent for 6 days, just circling it. They're supposed to carry the Ark of the Covenant with them, too. And God's like, you can't even let out a murmur or a sigh. You have to be quiet. I was like, that is so weird. What's up with that? And I guarantee you that the people living in Jericho, they weren't quiet, and they were probably dumping sewer stuff on them. They were probably harassing them, insulting them, making fun of their God, making fun of the Ark of the Covenant that they're carrying. Why are you guys dressed so funny? You're going to conquer us? Good luck with that. And God's like, you just show up. Just show up and march. Show up and march. And what I love about this is that God is teaching the Israelites a principle and a discipline that we need to embrace. And it's this discipline of presence. God is telling them and us, you show up, you go where I tell you. Not because God is a dictator, but because his ways are above our ways. And we know that he is love. God is love. He doesn't show love. I mean, he does show love, but his essence is love. And he's a good father. And he's like, Israelites, I need you to just listen to me. Just do this. And it's interesting that God has the military people from Israel. He's got the fighters circling. They're not fighting, they're just circling. And the priests are carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm sure the military guys are like, we need to launch an attack, is what we need to do, instead of going on this field trip every day. But God is teaching them to keep their focus on the right thing. He's like, shut up and just shut up and show up. And I know that sounds harsh, but sometimes we need to hear it like that. And he's teaching them not to function from a place of emotion, but from a place of obedience. And I feel like for this season that we've been in with our daughter, God's like, okay, pump the brakes. Back it up. What do you know about me? I love your daughter way more than you could ever love her. I got her. You need to trust me. And I love how God is just like, so when we're quiet like that, right? We're not running our mouth. That allows us to hear more and to listen more. Because often God doesn't speak in a big booming voice, although he can. It's a quiet whisper. And it's this whole idea of just being present. And here's the idea too. Israel could not have won this battle if they hadn't shown up. You got to show up to the battle to get the victory. And a lot of times it looks like we don't want to show up. We don't want to be present. God, this is too hard, too difficult. I can't take it anymore. And God's like, just show up. Be present. Zip your lip. Zip it, lock it, put it in your pocket. That's what Sophia's school tells them to be quiet. And this is what I want us to get to. There's our what we see, our reality, right? But God's vision is truth. So for the Israelites, they saw this fortress that couldn't be conquerable. It was just like, it was impossible. And people had tried. People had tried to conquer Jericho, and it didn't happen because it was so fortified. You know, they have basically these walls that are 4 stories high. And taking territory means you show up, even if you don't feel like it. It's not tied to our emotions. It's not tied to what we see. We are activated and motivated by what God speaks to us. Okay? And what I like too is that there's this professor named Amy Cuddy. She's a business professor, and she studies like dynamics between people and how they do business and posture and stuff. And she has this saying. She says, you know, we have this saying, you fake it till you make it. Her saying though is you practice it, you do it till you become it. And I think a lot of times we don't feel like it, right? We don't feel like there's victory anywhere in sight. But God's like, show up, just show up, just show up. And so I want to encourage you guys, like, show up. Cultivate that discipline of presence. All right, the other thing I want us to look at too is in verse 6. And it's a bunch of different times. It's 14 times in these short verses where God talks about bringing the Ark of the Covenant. So at this point, God had been accompanying Israel in the form of you guys remember? Cloud. Thank you, Jonathan. You've taught Sunday school, for a while. And then at this point, God's like, no, I'm going to do the Ark of the Covenant instead. No more cloud, Ark of the Covenant, okay? So the Ark of the Covenant, God wasn't confined to this Ark of the Covenant, the box, but it was a visual reminder to the Israelites that God's presence was in their midst, okay? And so what's fascinating is God's like, carry the Ark of the Covenant around Jericho as you march in silence. I would be kind of upset because the Ark of the Covenant was heavy and it was a big thing. You know, it's not like you could just pop it on your back and just... And so these priests are carrying it around. And I don't think God was just like, I just want to see if you do it. It was a visual reminder to the Israelites that God is with them. And I think a lot of times we need to do stuff to cultivate that in us. So sometimes we have to remember that God's in our midst. You know, it's reading a Bible or getting together for fellowship. Josh and I try to do this, but Josh is better at it. We have journals. I mean, it says, but coffee first. Amen, right? Amen. It's the second commandment, right? And this is a good way to remind yourself of God's presence. You write down your prayer requests and how God answers them. And then when you're feeling poopy or down, or you feel like God's abandoned you, you can open this up. Oh, my daughter got to this page. But you can open it up and be like, God, you were faithful. I had this prayer on this day, and you answered it on this day, God. Praise your name. God, you are moving. You are active, even though it doesn't seem like it now. All right. The other part of this carrying thing is that we are to bear the presence of God. We are to carry the presence of God with us. There's no special voodoo, or you don't have to be like, you know, super hyper spiritual. You have to be dialed into God, though, and submitted. Just submitted to God. and aware that God's presence can fill you completely. You don't put up any doors. You don't put up any conditions. You just say, okay, God. And I'm all for, like I just shared, like the prayer in the car. You can do that, or as you're waiting to go through your drive-thru or whatever. But part of this taking territory and carrying and bearing the presence of God is that we have to carve out time in our prayer closets. We have to dedicate time. Whether it's 5 minutes, you start out with 5 minutes, I don't care. But you designate that time where you sit down and you pray. You pray and you're not distracted. There's nobody tugging on your leg for anything. And you just sit and you pray and you petition God. And you just sit there. You know what happens? You start, without even knowing it, you just become more in step with God. You hear His voice more, and you bring that with you. You carry that with you. All right. Let me also just do one. I'm going to take 2 minutes. Ready, go, Mako. Okay. Something else I want to just show you guys that is phenomenal is in chapter 6, Joshua 6, verse 5. It says, okay, when there is a prolonged blast of the horn and you hear it sound, you have all the people give a mighty shout. Okay, and this is the part I want you to underline. Then the city wall will collapse and the people will advance, each man straight ahead. Can I have the bands and the ushers come up, please? Now, what's fascinating about that is that, okay, spoiler alert, they march around, and the seventh time they start shouting, and the walls crumble. And the cool thing is that archaeologists have dug up the city of Jericho. You know what they found? They found that the wall had collapsed, and the way that it collapsed, it made like ramps all around the city wall. And I think when we look around and we see obstacles, God's like, you show up, you be present. I will make a way where there is no way. I will take your obstacles and turn them into stepping stones. And when it talks about here that, the straight ahead, that means that he didn't even have to use a step stool. Everything crumbled in such a way that they're just able to walk right in. And when we take territory prayerfully and in tune with God, and we're zipping our mouth, and we're listening, and we're practicing presence and being present, God will open anything up to us. He will crumble the walls. And so whatever your Jericho is right now, I want you to know that you have to serve a good God, and He's mighty. And it sounds cliche, but there's nothing that He can't do. And there is hope for the journey, you guys. Hope for the journey. Lord, we just pray that you would bless this offering. God, we joyfully give back to you because you first gave to us.